All right. So I'm going to be recording this live. So I'm going to give it about 15 seconds here in the beginning just to make sure that the stream health is good before diving right in. So I'm going to listen to the audio. Let's see what we got. All right. So I'm going to be recording this. Okay, cool. So hopefully there's not any here in the beginning just to make sure that the stream, I think the audio is fine. All right, so what it is we're going to be doing today, or what I'm going to be doing today, is revisiting one of my very first videos ever, which is this calculator video right here. And this was actually the second video I ever uploaded to this channel, and people really liked it, and it was really helpful. But the way that I did it, I actually used the eval function to basically do the calculation on the calculator. And I agree that that's not the best practice. In fact, it's highly not recommended to use that in a real world application because it can cause all sorts of problems. But the reason why I did it in that video was because it was a super simple way to build a calculator. And I wanted to do it in the most simple way because I was really just trying to get people who are not used to JavaScript, who are very new to programming in general, kind of interested in the topic by making it as simple and fun as possible. So what this is me going back and rebuilding, basically building a calculator, but instead of using the eval function, we're going to do this the proper way. So this is going to be slightly more advanced than the original, but it's going to have better practices. You'll be able to scale this even further. It's just a better way to do this in every aspect. Now, what I will say is there will not be any new features of the calculator. It's going to be pretty much exactly the same. It's just that the code is going to be written in a way that is just way better. Okay, so now that I got that out of the way, I'm going to show you, this is the calculator right here that we're going to be building. That I'm going to be building, and you can totally follow along if you want to. And I'll just demo it really quick. We'll do 77 minus 7, which is 70. We'll do 12 times 12, 144. Divide that by 12, and we get, 144, I think we found a bug. Divided by 12 equals 12. So that's good. All right, so while we're going through, maybe I can find that and fix it on the fly. But let's just dig right into it. So in order to do that, I'm going to throw this window here on the left and have my code editor on the right. And obviously I'm going to be starting this whole thing from scratch, so it's about to be a blank screen. But you can see that my VS Code is on the right, and we're going to just go ahead and create an index.html file. And I'm going to populate this thing with some boilerplate code with a snippet that I've got. And I'm going to rename the title to be Calculator 2.0. So let's go ahead and save that, and I'm going to actually open this with Live Server. And as you can see, we have the title Calculator 2.0. So since I've got this new window open, I'm just going to close the old one. We won't need this for reference anymore. Now, before I dig too far into this, as you can see, there was a small bug with doing multiple calculations after you already clicked equals and stuff like that. I'm going to go ahead and say that this is not going to be a fully operational production ready calculator by any means. There's probably going to be small things that need improvements, and there's probably going to be small bugs that are probably hard to find. But that's okay, because this is really just how can we do this better than the original, and how can we make this more scalable, because we can do things like add server side calculations and stuff like that by doing it the way that I'm doing it and all that good stuff. So just wanted to get that out of the way really quick. So how are we going to start this? Well, I think I'm going to start by going through, putting all the HTML in here, getting it all on the screen. Then I'm going to jump over to the CSS, style it up so that it looks good, and then I'm going to focus solely on the JavaScript from there on out. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and begin on the HTML. So there's two things I want to add in the head, but I don't have the files yet. So I'm going to create a style.css and a script.js file. I'm going to close these for now because I'm not going to be worried about them until later, but I just wanted to go ahead and add them here in the head so that I don't have to think about that later on. So I'm going to use link, and it's going to be an href of style.css because that's what I named the file. And we're going to add a script as well with the source of script.js. Oops. And that is what I named the file as well. So those should be linked properly. Now I just want to make sure that I've linked my my files properly. I like to do this in the beginning just to make sure that I don't run into any bugs in the future. So I'm just going to set the background color to something like red, just to make sure that the CSS is linked. Awesome. So I can get rid of that. And then I just want to console.log something here in the script file so that I can make sure that the JavaScript is also linked. And I can see that in the console. I'm going to actually move this to the bottom for visibility's sake. And I'm going to bring this down, but I don't need it for now anyway. But yeah, so those are linked successfully. And I'm going to go ahead and begin thinking about my layout. So actually, I know that I'm going to want to wrap this entire thing inside of a div, and I might as well give the class a class called main. And I know that the actual calculator itself is going to need a container, so I'm going to give that a class of calc. And each of the rows inside of the calculator, I'm going to actually make a like a flexbox row. So each row of buttons, including the display itself, is going to be inside of a row. So I'm going to create a row div. Now, actually, I kind of need to bring the old calculator into the view because I need to reference it to know like how many rows there are just in the beginning so I can talk about it. So I'm not going to keep that hidden. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5 rows in total. And I wanted to bring it up so I can just kind of explain how I'm going to go about this layout. But as you can see, the clear button and the display, I'm calling this display, is the first row. Then the second row, third row, fourth row, and fifth row. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows in total. So keeping that in mind, I'm actually going to bring this over to the side and pin it so that I can distinguish it. And I'm going to copy and paste 5 of these. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now I have 5 of these rows. And I knew that the first one, if you remember, has the clear button and the display. So I can go ahead and create 2 divs inside of here. One for the clear button and one for the display. And the text for the clear button was just the letter C. So I'll do that. And then the display, we'll just put 0 in there initially, and then we can come back. But I need to distinguish these, so I'm going to give the display an ID of display. And the reason why I'm giving it an ID is because it's very unique. And also, I'm going to be referencing it a lot in the JavaScript, so it makes it super easy for me to reference it in JavaScript. And then the clear button should have both an ID and a class. So the class is going to be BTN. And the reason why I'm giving it a class and an ID is because it's a button. So it's going to need a click event listener along with all these other buttons. But it does need to be distinguished from the rest. So each of these are also going to get IDs that helps me distinguish them. So we'll go ahead and give it a class of button, but we need to give it an ID, which I'll set to clear here. So for now, that's good for the first row. I think I'm going to work on the second row. Now, the second row has 1, 2, 3, 4 items inside of it. So each of these items will have a class of BTN. So I might as well go ahead and copy pasta that 4 times. And it was in order 7, 8, 9, and the plus sign. So I'll put that in there, 7, 8, 9, and then the plus sign. Now, again, these all have a common class because they all are in fact buttons, but I do need to distinguish between them. So the easiest way for me to do that is by using an ID, and I can actually put the number value in here as the ID. So let's do that. And then for the plus button, I don't want to put the plus symbol as the ID. That's not a good idea. I don't even know if that would work. So let's just call it plus. Actually, let's call it add. let's use the verb form of it. So we have, I think that's going to be good for this row. So now I can actually just pretty much copy and paste this 1, 2, 3 more times. I'll get rid of these because it's more convenient. 2, 3, and I'm just going to go through and do 4, 5, 6, and minus for the second row. Whoops. And then I have to go in and do the same thing for the IDs. And instead of add, it'll be subtract. All right. And then the third row is 1, 2, 3, and multiply. 1, 2, 3, and then I'll do an asterisk. And we have to do it over here too. And we're going to do multiply. And the final row is 0. Okay, I better keep this one open. 0 dot, I'll call that dot, equals, and divided by. So over here we'll do 0 for the ID. I'll call this dot for the ID. We'll do equal and divide. So that should be it for pretty much for the entirety of the HTML. Let me save this and see what this looks like. It looks like I would expect it to look. Obviously there's no CSS yet. So I think we're good here. So I'm going to go ahead and call it quits on the HTML. I've already got my script file and my CSS file linked, so I can probably just go ahead and move right over to the CSS now and begin writing that. But before I do that, I need to save this image from Pexels, which I'll include in the description later. If you're watching it live, you might be able to see. It's going to be kind of hard, but you can add any picture you want. But I will make sure that if you're watching this after it's posted, you'll have a link to the image. I'm going to save this as bg.jpeg, so basically short for background.jpg, and I can see it right here, so I know it's in my project, and I can get rid of that. So to start off with, I'm going to begin by styling the body, and since I just brought in that image, I want to go ahead and bring it into my HTML, and I have to use the URL and pass in a string, and the relative path is /background.jpg, and now the image is there. However, as it becomes bigger, if I make this bigger, you can see it starts to duplicate the image. I don't like the way that looks, so what I'm going to do is add these lines of code right here, which just makes it to where it looks good at pretty much any size, except for apparently the size that you are seeing it right now. So what I need to do is probably, it would look good like that, but not like this. So for now, I'm going to comment this out and revisit that to make sure that it looks good when it's like this as well. But it probably has to do with the background size. Might be able to do cover, something like that. But it doesn't quite like that. So yeah. So I'll just have to revisit that. But for now, this is fine. So I will go and just, I want to, usually I like to add margin 0, padding 0. And for this, I'm doing a font family sans serif because just, I think it looks better, especially for buttons and that sort of thing. Let me switch this back to cover. Interesting. Okay, we'll come back to that. I know I keep playing with that, but the first thing I want to style is the main, because that's really the closest thing to the body. If we go in terms of abstraction, that's the closest thing to the body. So I'm going to start with the main tag, and I'm going to be using flexbox throughout this. So I'll go ahead and set the display to flex. And as you can see, that already makes some changes that you can visibly see here. I don't like that. That's not really like the finished product, but we'll get there. So we need to justify the content to center. And as you can see now, the stuff gets moved horizontally to the center, and I want to make it vertically center as well. So I'll do align items center. And I have to actually set the height to 100 view height in order for it to stretch out and actually be the full height of the view. and then now it's centered vertically. So centering vertically is really easy using Flexbox, as you can tell. But now I want to go ahead and bring in the styles for the calculator, which again is the closest abstraction to main, and I'm just kind of going in that order moving forward. So this is where I'm going to start bringing in some kind of hard-coded heights and stuff like that, and I'll explain that as I go. But the height I'm going to be setting to 320 pixels, and that's because I already know the height and the width that I want to make all the buttons. So I can know that since I know how many rows there are and I know exactly how many buttons there are, I can hard code everything since it's not going to be dynamic in any way. The calculator itself is going to have a display of flex, and you can do two different directions for display flex. You can either do column or row. And in this case, I want to do column because I'm doing rows. So each row will have a flex direction of row, but the actual container needs to have a flex direction of column so that it goes down vertically, because each row needs to be on its own line. So we will do flex direction column here. Nope. Come on. And then what I need to do is go ahead and set a couple of colors, which I've already pre-selected out. So the background color I'm setting to this, and the box shadow I'm setting to be 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 10 pixels, and then this hex code right here. And as you can see now, the color is there. Of course, it's overflowing and it looks horrible, but we'll get to that in just a minute. I'm going to set the padding to 10 pixels to give it some space. And as you can see, it does in fact give these numbers a little bit of space. And as we get the layout looking correct in a little bit, it will make more sense. In fact, I think I should just go ahead and add the width right now, which is going to be 250 pixels, which will clearly make that look a little bit better. But again, these are outside of all of this, so that does not look good, but we'll get to that in a minute. So the overflow for the calculator is going to be hidden. And we are going to set the border radius of the calculator to 10 pixels. So you can see that that adds a nice little bezel to the edge. And by setting the overflow to hidden, the items inside of it will also basically, the corner items will also have that same bezel. So that's why I added that. Now I want to do some row style. The rows, we need to set the width to 100% so that it stretches out across. And we need to do a display of flex for this as well. And by default, the display is, the flex direction for these items are going to be row. So I don't have to worry about setting that manually. And then I can set the justify content to space between, which towards the end there, I might be able to show you the difference. But if you can look over here, you can see that if I don't do space between, it's all smashed together on the left. But if I do space between, it spaces everything evenly between. It's kind of hard to explain without having multiple examples in front of me, but space evenly would put an even space between everything, but space between stretches everything out and pushes space between each element, basically. Okay, so let's go ahead and target the buttons. So right now this looks absolutely horrendous, and we want to fix that. So let's start by targeting the buttons. The width and the height of these buttons needs to be 50 pixels each. And that makes some crazy stuff happen, but don't worry. We'll get to it. The display of the buttons is flex because I want to easily be able to center the content inside of the buttons vertically and horizontally. So display flex makes it really easy to do that because now I can just say justify content center and align items center, and it will center them horizontally and vertically. Of course, you can't tell yet because there's no background color on it. So if I were to put that in there, comment these out, you could see it's all like the numbers are at the top, but if I uncomment those, you can see now it's all vertically centered. So one of the things that is annoying is like when you press buttons or our little homemade buttons, it highlights the text sometimes. So I'm using this little snippet right here that will make sure that that doesn't happen. So that's all this is doing. It makes it to where now you cannot highlight the text. So very little handy snippet there. But I also want to set the cursor to pointer so that it's more obvious that they are buttons. And a little bit later, we're going to add a transition when you hover over them. Let me bring this down a little bit so you can actually see. These are all breaking out of this. We'll get to that in a minute, but I want to set a transition period, not transform, but transition, so that when we do add a transition on the hover effect, it will take 0.15 seconds, which I think is the most aesthetically pleasing the majority of the time. So right now I need to figure out why these are breaking out of the container, because I don't want to be too confusing here in the beginning, but mostly I wanted to focus on the JavaScript anyway. That's why I'm rushing through the CSS here. But let's take a look at what's going on with the overflow. So it's because I have a closing tag for the calc in the HTML in a place that's not supposed to be. So I'm closing, I must have missed a tag or something like that. Let's see. Where is the closing tag for this? Here? Let me find my little typo really quick and then I can continue. Somewhere I have an extra tag. Maybe that's it. No? Somehow where was that thing? I'm not sure where that missing tag was, but basically I had a missing tag somewhere which was making it look crazy like it was. Sorry about that. So carrying on forth with the CSS, you can see that the first line is the clear button and the display, and then each row after that is just a row of numbers, and on the right we have all of our operations. That is so far so good. However, I don't like the spacing here. So let's go ahead and set on our calc. We should probably set the space between, or set it to space between. So justify content space between. And that, as you can see, like I said, it pushes everything to where there's space in between each row. Since I am doing flex direction column, it did it vertically, as you could see there. Excellent. So let's focus on the display for a second. I'm gonna select that with a hashtag because it's an ID. As you can see here, we have added an ID for display, but no class. So I'm just selecting it with a hashtag. And we're gonna go through and set some styles on this. The color is white, and the background color needs to be this little hex code right here, which gives it this kind of blue look. Obviously that's kind of small, so we need to stretch it out. Let's do a width of 180 pixels. Again, I already know the widths that I want to use. That's why I'm hard coding everything. The display needs to be flex because it, again, makes it really easy to center everything vertically and horizontally by just saying justify content center. Well, actually, justify content I want to put to right because I want the number to be on the right side, which didn't quite work. Oh, it's flex end, that's why. Flex end, my apologies. Now it's on the right side, and align items, center. Sure. Boom. All right, so it needs a little bit of a padding. Let's add a padding of 10 pixels. But as you can see, the padding affected the width, and whenever that happens, I just set the box sizing to border box, and it fixes our problem. Let me get rid of some of these spaces. Now, one of the things that I'm going to be doing is actually adding a border radius on each of the corners, and it's going to be on the corner it corresponds to. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at this display here. In order to match this kind of design where each of the four corners are beveled, I want to bevel only the corner it corresponds to. So in the case of the display, it's the top right corner. So in order to do that, we're going to use 0 pixels, 10 pixels, because it starts at the top left corner. We'll say 0 pixels bevel for the top left, but we want a 10 pixel bevel for the top right. And then the bottom right is 0 and the bottom left is 0. And when I save, you can see that the radius has been added. Now, if I add a bunch of numbers, so let's say I go in here and put like 999999999999999, just like this ridiculous series of numbers here. I want the text to basically not do what it's doing now. I want it to not overflow, and I want there to be 3 dots at the end that shows the user that, hey, like you've got too many characters in here, so we're hiding some of them. It makes it really obvious that it is indeed being hidden. So I have to set the overflow to hidden. I have to set the text overflow to ellipsis. Actually, let me show you a little thing that I'm just realizing. Since I'm doing display flex, I can't do that. So with display block, I can, as you can see, but I don't want to use display block because it's just not as convenient as display flex in this case here for what I'm doing. So I'm actually going to get rid of this for now, and we'll revisit that concept later. We might just actually leave it like it is, and we'll be decreasing the font size, I guess, each time the user types in a number. If the user types in like 10 numbers, then we'll decrease the font size. Yeah, something like that. All right, sweet. I think that's pretty much it for the display. If not, we'll revisit it, but I want to move on to the hover for the button. So let's do btn, and then let's say whenever we hover over a button, of course we have the transition 0.15 seconds. We need to add that here as well. And I want to set a box shadow to like 0 pixels, maybe 5 pixels black, perhaps. And as you can see, it makes it look, it's a little too defined. Let's do 2 pixels. Yeah, that's a little better. So it makes it more obvious that you're hovering over it. It gives it a little bit more interactivity and kind of just more pleasant in general. So that's cool, but I want to make the color for these operators different than the rest so that it's more, it pops out more. So I'm going to select each of these individually. So add, subtract, let's say multiply and divide. And let's set the background color to be that. So 4E0110. And the color to be white. Now I'm going to do a similar thing with clear, equal, and dot. So like this. So the clear button, the equal button, and the dot button will have white text and a background color of AD2F16. So if you save that, you can see that that updates the color of those buttons, which I think ends up looking a bit better. Now, if you remember, we added the little bezel to the display. We should do the same thing with the other 3 corners. So let's go ahead and select those individually. Let's select the clear button and do a border radius of starting at the top left corner, so 10 pixels, and then moving around it in a clockwise direction. That looks good. And we need to do the same thing for divide. So starting at the top left corner and moving in a clockwise direction. Whoops, gotta add border radius here. It'll be 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 10 pixels, 0 pixels, which is correct. And then finally, and I'm just gonna copy and paste this one because it makes it easier. Let's do the 0 button. So I don't think we can do that to select it, and that's the ID we gave it, which is ID of 0. So let me add an extra. I've already added an extra class here for a class of 0. So go ahead and make sure that you have this extra 0 class on this, because that's how I'm going to distinguish it here in CSS. And instead of that, we are just going to make the very last one 10 pixels, and we have all of the corners. That should be pretty much it for the CSS. If I forgot anything, I'll just simply revisit it later on, which means we can get to the good stuff, and that is the JavaScript. Okay, so I've got this like hard-coded massive number in here. I'm just gonna keep this initialized to 0 for now. And I wanna start thinking about the JavaScript. How am I going to approach this? And I'm going to approach it by saying, first of all, we're loading the JavaScript in the head. So we need to make sure that we don't run this until we know that all of the stuff inside of the body has loaded. So I'm going to use a window.event listener. I'm going to add an event listener called DOM content loaded. And I'm going to use an arrow function. Actually, I don't even need that. I'm going to run a function called init when the DOM content has loaded. So I need to define that function, call it init. And all init is going to do is it's going to loop through all of these buttons. It's going to find every single button, and it's going to add a click event listener. Okay, so the easiest way for me to do this is to create an array from each of the buttons. So in order to do that, let's just talk about document.getElements by class name. And if I were to get all of the elements by class name with the class name of button, this would be called a query list, and it does not have access to the for each function, because the for each function is a function of the array object. So this is not going to return an array. This is going to return a query list, and I want to use that for each function. So in order to do that, I'm going to run array.from on that query list, which is going to convert it into an array, and now I can run for each on that. So since I have for each, I'm going to say for each button, what do I want to do? Well, like I said before, I want to add an event listener of type click, and I'm going to use an arrow function here, and I'm going to call a function called handle button press, and I'm going to pass in the button's ID. Now, if you remember, each of these IDs has, like for instance, if I press the 7 button, the ID is 7. Now you got to remember that that's actually a string. When I pull it out, when I pull the ID out, it's actually going to be a string. It's not going to be a number. So just keep that in mind for later. So if I press the 7 button, it's going to call handle button press with the string value of 7. And if I press like the clear button, that would be an ID of clear. So it would call handle button press with a string value of clear. Okay, so I need to actually have a handle button press function. So let's do that. Function handle button press. And as we know, it's going to take a button ID. So button ID is the argument that we're passing in. And we're going to do we're going to do a conditional statement here, which is going to check what was pressed. And depending on what was pressed, we're going to run some given function, which means we're going to need several functions up here that we're going to define. I guess right now, might as well. The first one I'm going to call decimal press, which will obviously get called whenever the decimal is pressed. The second one will be called, let's call number press. And we should probably pass in the number that was pressed. So let's just say like num. And function, we're also going to need operator press. And obviously we're going to need to know which operator was pressed. So I'll call that OP for short. And so that should be the 3 fundamental cases here on a button press. So this would be the clear button. In the case of the clear button, I'm not going to call a function called clear button press because it's going to be super easy. I can just handle it in my if statement down here. But for these 3, it makes sense to have a function. Maybe not as much for decimal press, but that's fine. So let's just start by checking whether or not the button ID is equal to dot, because the ID for the, the decimal button is dot, as you can see right here. So if we have an ID of dot on this handle button press function, then we know that they press the decimal button, and I should call decimal press function. And let's just make sure that works by coming in here and logging, whoops, yo. We'll say decimal press. And I'm gonna do this, having a little bit of a typing issue apparently. I'm gonna also log number press and operator press, but we haven't called those yet, that's fine. We'll get to that in a second. And I also want to make sure in these, I also log which number I pressed, along with also which operator I pressed, so that we can truly make sure that this thing is working as expected. Come into here, go to the console, make this a little smaller. Hopefully you can see down here. Maybe I can zoom in, there we go. So I'm gonna press the decimal button, and you can see it says decimal press. Now obviously if I press any other button, nothing's gonna happen, because right now the only if statement we have, or the only check we have, is for the decimal button. So let's go ahead and run this and say clear button. Like, what if the button ID is equal to clear? Well, again, the logic that we're gonna run for the clear button is like super simple, so I don't need to have a function for the clear button. And like I said, I probably don't even need one for the decimal press button, but I'm adding it for now anyway. But since that's the case, I'm just going to come in here and say clear button press, just to make sure that this is working. So if I click clear, you can see clear button press appears. And if I click the period, we still get decimal press. So far so good. Go ahead, and I guess I'll keep that logic there. Now, what is the next case? Let's do number press. So let's say else if. Now, how are we going to determine whether or not a number was pressed? Well, I could go in and individually check for the ID of 7, 8, 9, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, and 0, and that would be tons of manual code that I don't feel like writing. So instead, I'm going to check whether or not it is a number that you clicked. And the best way to do that is to try to parse it out. And we can say button ID. So let's try to parse the number out, but let's also check whether or not that is a number. So we can use the isNaN function. So in other words, is not a number, that's what this stands for. So if I get rid of this exclamation point, what this is saying is if this is in fact not a number. So by adding the exclamation point, I'm doing the opposite of that. I'm saying, so if this is in fact a number, then we are going to run number press. And I'm going to call number press with the button ID. Now I'm going to call it with the button ID. So in other words, it's going to be a string. So the number that we pass into number press is actually going to be a string. So just remember that. So let's go in here and type in 5. Number press, and then you can see the number 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, good to go. Clear button press. So none of these really do anything, we're just logging. And then finally, the only other type of button that you can press is the operator. So we can just assume that on the else case, we're calling operator press, and we can pass in button ID. So finally, if I just come in here and let's do multiply. If I click multiply, you can see operator press multiply, divide, equal. So equal would be considered a operator in this case here. So that's good. So far, so good. What do I want to do next? Let's see. I guess like each time I press the button, I want to update the display so that if I press the number 9, we see the number 9. Let's start there and go on. So function update display. Now update display could potentially take, now let's say you click clear. If you click clear, then we want to update the display to 0 100% of the time. But also we may want to update the display with like some random value. Like if I click 9, we want to update the display with 9. Or if I do a mathematical operation like 9 times 9, then we'd want to update it with 81. So we want to potentially pass in a argument, but we also want to set a default to 0 in case we want to just reset this thing. We don't have to manually pass in 0. We can just set a default. So if we don't pass in an argument, we're going to update it to 0. So just keep that in mind. Now, what I wanted, as I was saying earlier, one of the things that I wanted to make sure we do is if the user types in a bunch of numbers, I want to make the font size smaller as the numbers, the number count, I guess you could say, increases. Now, one of the things I forgot to do was add the font size for the display. So jumping back to the CSS, find the display, I'm going to set the font size to 28. You can see the number's bigger now, and I think that looks good for this case because now it's more visible. But again, as I type in more numbers, eventually we want to make that smaller. And one of the limitations of what I'm doing today is going to be the fact that, you know, JavaScript has a certain cap on like numbers that it can operate on before it starts to break down. So basically like a max number. We're not going to handle that case, and we're also not going to handle the case if they just keep pressing like a bunch of buttons. You know, the number's going to overflow. So we're not going to worry about those two cases because those are edge cases, and that could totally be a future video where we go and just like master this calculator if we want to. So update display, the first thing I want to do is grab the number of numbers inside of the display. So we'll say digit count, and we can do that by splitting the number into an array. And we know that this number is supposed to always be a string. So we can do this. And by saying number.split with an empty string, we're basically breaking down a string into an array where each item of the array is a character in that string. So I can say .length on that and effectively get the number. I guess technically I don't need to do that. I could just do this. So I'm going to do that because you can actually call length on a string. So I really didn't need to do the splitting stuff. That was kind of unnecessary. But at least you learned something new possibly. So display element, I'm going to create a reference to the display element. So this element right here, I'm going to create a JavaScript reference to that so that we can do operations and that sort of thing on it. So document.getElement by ID, and the ID was display. Display. Yeah. So now I have a reference to the display element. So what we wanted to do was to make it smaller depending on how many numbers are inside of there. But I want to wait to do that because I want to know how many numbers can fit in there before it starts to look ugly. So we'll visit that in a second, revisit. And underneath, we'll just go ahead and set the inner text of this thing. Inner text equal to the number. So whatever number we pass into update display, we're going to go ahead and update that value in here. And I'm going to press a bunch of buttons and see how many numbers can fit in there before it starts to look bad. But we need to actually call update display. So let's, inside of the number press function, set the update display to be none. Now, obviously this isn't going to work amazingly because if I type in 9, it becomes 9. And then if I type in 4, it becomes 4. I want it to grow. So when I type in 9 and then 4, I want it to be 94. So best way to do that is to create I guess we'll call a global variable. And while I'm up there, I'm just going to go ahead and add the global variables I'm going to be using throughout this video. Numbers is an array of numbers, obviously, but not the numbers that you're typing, but rather the entirety of the number. So if I type in 944 and then I press the plus button, then numbers will now have a new item, and that item will be 944. So the number 944. So that's what that is for. It's, in other words, to keep track of the numbers we're going to be operating on. Operations is the same thing, but for operators. So if I type in 94 plus 3 minus 2, then operations will be an array with plus and minus in it. And numbers will have the two numbers that I just said. So current number is the value that you see inside of the display at any given time. When we start this application up, we initialize it to 0. So it's going to be 0 by default. Operation mode is whether or not the user is able to press an operator button. So like plus, minus, multiply, divide, because we don't want the user to be able to fill up our operations array with like a bunch of operations. So in other words, if they type in like 9 plus, multiply, minus, divide, then they're totally breaking our app, and we don't want to allow that. So we're going to say there's going to be a piece of state that says, hey, you can press plus or minus or multiply only sometimes. And just keep that in mind. That's why this exists. We'll talk more about that when we get to it. Cool. So the current number, that's the piece of state that I am concerned with right now, because that's what's in the display. So going back here to the display, when we call number press, what we really want to do is call update display with the number. Well, actually, it kind of depends, because what if the, let me show you. So let's say I set it equal to current num plus num. So what do we have? Current number, not current num. Let's see what happens. So remember, these are strings, not numbers. So we're concatenating the string. So you would expect if I type in 9, the value would be 9. And then if I type in 8, the value would then be 9 plus 8. So concatenated would be 98. But let's see what happens when I type in 8. As you can see, it's 0, 8. And we want that 0 to disappear. Also, yeah, that's not good. We have to reassign current number. So that is not ideal. So we need to check whether or not the current number is 0. And that's what I'm doing here. So if current number is in fact equal to the string 0, then we're going to go ahead and just assign current number to that number. If it's not 0, then it's going to be concatenating the string together, okay? So that's still not going to be quite ideal, because watch, it's 0 now. If I click 9, it'll be 9. It'll be 99 apparently. Let me refresh this. If I click 9, it'll be 99. Interesting. Well, oh, that's because I'm doing this. My apologies. So save that. If I click 9, it'll be 9. If I click 8, now it's 98. So actually that is the behavior I would want. So that's good. But at this point, the reason why it's not really complete is because we want to flip over operation mode to true. Because once a user starts to type in some numbers, then operation mode can be true. All right. So now I can type in a bunch of numbers and see how many numbers can fit without it looking weird. All right, so that is when it starts to look weird. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So really anything more than 10. So let's say 11, things start to look a little weird. So the first check I'll say is if digit count is greater than or equal to 11, perhaps, we can set the font size. Let's set the font size to 20 pixels. So we already have that reference to the display element here. And I'm just saying .style .font size so that I can access the CSS and just kind of manipulate it on the fly here in JavaScript. We'll set it to 20 if it's greater than or equal to 11. So let's see, 5, 5, 5. All right, let's see what happens. Okay, that looks good. So that's 11, right? 12, 13, 14, 15. So right at about 15, it starts to look bad again. So let's do one more. Let's say if digit count is greater than 14, so that would be 15 and up. Or we could say greater than or equal to 15 just to stay consistent with our little operands or whatever. I'll set the font size to be 15 pixels, 15 pixels. So let's see. So as we go across, it shrinks. And then as we go across, okay, we gotta make sure that that is doing what it's supposed to do. And it looks like it's kind of not, right? What did I miss? Here, let's console.log the digit count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So it shrinks at 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. It doesn't shrink. Oh, my bad. We have to put another check in here that says if digit count is also less than 15. So that's why it wasn't shrinking. Okay, so now it shrinks here, and then it shrinks again. And then if they just put in this many numbers, I'm gonna say, you know what? We're just gonna let you break. I think I will at least set the overflow to be hidden though, so that it looks like this. So it shrinks, and then it doesn't look as bad. But I'm not gonna handle that edge case in this video, as I said earlier. So if they just keep pressing numbers, that's on them. All right, sweet. So that is pretty much, well, I was gonna say that's it, but if you click the clear button, then we need to have the case to where it sets it back to its original state. So the original font size is 28. We need to make sure that we set it back to 28 in any other case. So let's go back here and set that back to 28 whenever we, yeah. So that will reset it if it's less than 11, basically. Okay, what's next? I guess what we want to do, I can type in here, so that's cool, but we can't do math yet. Actually, I want to set the clear button. You want to do the clear button? Let's do the clear button. So the first thing I want to do with the clear button is reset the display. So we can call update display, and that should just automatically work because I've got that default in here. So if I type in 77 clear, it does clear, but the problem is that we still have these global variables up here that did not get reset. So as you can see, it clears it, but then as I start to type, it goes back to the way it was because these need to be reset as well, which means I really need to have a reset function that resets all that. So let's call function reset, and we're going to set numbers equal to empty array, operations, can be an empty array, whoop. And we need to set the current number equal to 0. I wonder, give me 1 second. We may want the ability to pass in a specific number for reset. Yeah, so let's say num, and if num exists, we'll set it to num, otherwise we'll set it to 0. So if we don't pass in anything, it's basically the same as doing this, to be honest. I should probably just follow the same convention here. Sweet. So now let's say 45 clear, 45. I actually need to call reset though. So in here, let's call reset before we call update display. So 45 clear, 45 clear, 33 clear. Okay, clear appears to be working good now. So let's focus on what we need to do in the case of an operation press. Yeah. So let's do operator press. Yeah, let's do that. So we have this stuff. What happens when we press an operator? So if I type in 33 and I press plus, then what I want to happen is I want to set 33. I want to push 33 into the numbers array. And I want to push plus into the operations array. And then I want to reset current number back to 0. Okay. So let's start there. So inside of operator press, let's say numbers dot push current number. So again, remember that current number is a string. So this array is actually a array of string numbers, basically string representation of numbers. I also want to set operations dot push, and you can see we have a reference to the operator. So let's push that into the operations array. And then, as I said, I think we want to we want to call update display with 0. So I don't have to pass in anything because our default is 0. So let's see what happens here. Let's say 45 plus. So by clicking plus, it did reset it. Let's log operations and numbers just to make sure that the arrays look as I would expect. So if I type in 22 and then the multiply, I would expect multiply and 22. That is perfect. Okay, so far so good. Now the case that we need to worry about is equals, because when the user click equals, that's when we're telling the calculator to run the calculations. So I'm going to create a calculate function that we're going to call shortly, but for now I'll just log in here, calculate, and we want to make sure we call calculate if op is equal to equal. That's kind of funny to say. So we'll call calculate in that case. So I'm going to save and click equals, and you can see it calls calculate. But we don't want to be able to call any operations if we're not in operation mode. So we're not in operation mode by default, so none of this is doing anything. The only time it should ever do something is if I first type in some numbers, then click it. Okay, so far so good. So the calculate function is going to have to return the new value. So instead of logging anything, we want to make sure that we perform some sort of math. So perform math. And inside of here, we can actually set current number equal to whatever calculate is going to end up returning. Then when we have that value, we can call update display with the updated value, and then reset with that value, because we want to make sure we call reset, but we don't want to reset the current number, or we do. Yes, that is correct. Okay, so when we type in like 12 times 12, the current number is 144. So we want to reset both of these, but we want to make sure we're still displaying 144. We don't want to be displaying 0, so that's why we're passing in the number here. All right, so that's cool, but we need to, if it's not equal, so if the operator is not the equal sign, we want to make sure that we set current number to 0. And we're calling update display here. What we should probably do is use that instead of setting that manually. All right, that should be good. And then at the end, sorry, I also want to reset operation back to false, or operator mode. Operator mode. What is it called again? Operation mode. Back to false. Okay, so what happens? 12 times, and that's what I would expect, because now I should be able to type in 12 again. But as you can see, that happens, and it's because calculate, we got to go ahead and run this calculate method now, don't we? Does update display, so update display doesn't actually set the current number, so we do actually need to reset the current number here. So that's why, so I type in 12 times 12, there we go. And now when I click equals, I would expect the calculate function to run, and we should see 144 here. All right, so let's go ahead and create the calculate function. So in the original calculator video, I used the eval function like this. And let me just tell you, you shouldn't use this because you can, like hackers can execute malicious code inside of there. And also, if you don't write your code well enough, you could totally mess yourself up. So it's just not a best practice. A better practice would be to compute this manually, thus limiting the amount of things that can happen. So I'm going to start by creating a total variable, set that equal to 0, because we're going to use this variable to perform, we're going to set that value as we loop through each of the individual operations and numbers that we've been keeping track of. So again, since I'm using 12 times 12 right now, if I type in 12 times 12 equals, then I would expect the arrays to look a little something like this. Oops. So as you can see, there's a pattern here, which is that each of these arrays are the same length. So keeping that in mind, let's do an if check and check, no, let's just start with the loop. For, and let's start the loop at 0. So let I equals 0. I needs to be less than numbers.length, and I could do either operations.length or numbers.length. It doesn't matter because they're both the same length, but I'm going to just do it like this because that's the first one in order. Is just, why not? I plus plus. So now we're looping through the numbers array or the operations array, either one. And I want to take this number and set it equal to total on the first iteration. So if I is equal to 0, then we're on the first iteration. I can set total equal to 12 because there is no operation initially. Because when I first come in here and I type in 12, I'm not doing any operations. I'm just setting the total to 12 right now. Then when I click plus, the next number that I type in, we're going to run the first operation on the previous number. So in any other case, if I does not equal 0, then we know what we want to do. We want to set total equal to the current total. Let's just use the 12 and 12 multiply and equal case. We want to set total equal to the current total, which is 12, multiplied by the current number we're on. So the first iteration, we set the total equal to 12. Then on the second iteration, we want to say we want to take the current number we're on, and whatever operation we're on, we want to perform that operation on whatever the total is. In order to better understand why we're doing this, I'm going to add in a third case. So again, both are the same length. And this is saying 12 times 3 minus 12. So 12 times 3 minus 12 equals. So as you can see, we're like bouncing back and forth. So 12 is the total because we're on the first iteration. We set total equal to 12. Now we're on the second iteration and the current value is 3, but the total is 12. So what we want to do is take 3 and multiply it by 12 and set that value equal. And we want to now set total equal to that value. Now we're on the third iteration and the current value is 12 and the total is 36. And we want to take the total and subtract 12 from that. Okay, hope that makes a little bit of sense. In order to distinguish between, say, multiply, minus, divide, add, and all of those things, we're going to create one more function. So I'm going to comment this out for now, and we're going to create a function called operate, which really its only job is going to be to basically replace the eval function in a way. It's kind of, we need to be able to know, should we be adding, should we be subtracting, and what kind of logic do we need to run in each of those cases. So operate, and it's going to take val1, val2, and the operator. Now val1 is going to be the total, the current total, so this on whichever iteration we're on. Val2 is the current number we are on in the array as we're looping through, and operator is the previous operation, because the numbers are always one step ahead of the operation. So let's switch. Let's do a switch statement. I want to use my snippet. There we go. So let's switch on the operator and start with the easiest case, which is add. In the case of add, we just want to return val1 plus val2. In the case of minus, we just want to return val1 minus val2, because val1 is the total, so whatever the total is right now, we want to subtract the current number from that. So that's why we're doing it in that order specifically. Case multiply. We want to return val2 times val1. I guess order doesn't matter here for multiplication, so we'll go ahead and do that. The only time order matters is in division and subtraction here. So case divide, we want to return val1 divided by val2. And we have to add a default case here. Let's return the string form of 0 in the case of default, which means like none of these cases existed, so therefore we're just going to return 0. That should never happen, but we just add it just in case. Got a error on line 42, which I would expect because I'm saying I equals 0 equals 0, which is not at all what I meant to do. I'm supposed to be checking if I is equal to 0. So don't know how that happened. Okay, so now that we have the operate function, I can set total equal to operate. Val1 is the total. Val2 is the number we're on, but now look, inside of operate, it's expecting actual numerical values now for value 1 and value 2. So we need to parse the number out of there. But it could be a float because we could have decimals in there, which we haven't looked at decimals yet, but we'll get in there in a second. So we should probably call number.parse float on numbers I. So numbers I is the current number we're on. We're parsing the float out of that, and that is value 2. And then finally, we want to pass in the operation, which is, this is where it's kind of tricky. But again, if you remember what I was trying to emphasize so much earlier, is that on the first iteration, we're setting total equal to 12. Then on the second iteration, we're on 3, and the total is equal to 12. We're on the second iteration, but now we want to do the operation of the previous I value. So right now I is 1, and we're on the second item in this array. But in terms of operations, we care about the previous operation because we want to multiply 3 times the total. So we need to say operations I minus 1 in order to get the previous one. Like that. Yeah. Okay. So we're calling calculate, and we're setting current number to whatever this calculate function we just wrote returns. So now current number should be the value, and then we should update the display with that value and then reset, maintaining the same display value. So let's say 12 times 12 equals. Okay, we get 0, which is not what I would want to see. Why might that be? Let's log inside of calculate to make sure we're at least getting this far. We'll say 12 times 12 equals, so we're getting that far. And then let's go inside the operate and see if we are getting that far. Operate, and if so, I want to log val1, val2, and OP, just to make sure everything is good so far. Apparently it's not though. 12 times 12 equals. So it does in fact go through, we get that far. We're not returning the total at the end. We need to return total. That's probably what it is. So let's do it now. 12 times 12 equals, and now we have 144. Okay. Let's try a couple other operations and see what happens. 13 minus 3 equals, all right, well, obviously that's not correct. 13 minus 3 equals, yeah, that's incorrect. So what might that be? Minus, it must be, oh, it's subtract. It's supposed to be subtract. Okay, let's try that again. 13 minus 3 equals, okay, well, that's not correct. 13 minus 3 should be 10. 13 minus 3 equals, there must be an ID mismatch or something. Let's see. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What could possibly be causing? Let's take a look here again. Log val1, val2, and OP. Save. 13 minus 3 equals 12, 3, and subtract. So 12. Am I hard coding 12? I am hard coding 12. What am I thinking? All right, so total should be numbers I. So I was hard coding 12 for the example and forgot to fix it. 13 minus 3 is equal to 10. Okay. 12 plus 3 is equal to not that. Let's refresh. 12 plus 3. I just want to see. So the problem here is that we need to be probably parsing this out. Indeed. Parse float. Silly typos. It's part of the issue of doing it live as well. All right, so 12 plus 3 is equal to 15. 15 minus, let's say, 20 is equal to -5. I think division is the only one we need to test now. 144 divided by 12 is equal to 12, so that's correct. Let's say 12 divided by 7. We get this massive number. It didn't shrink the size of the value in the display. Oh, you know what? It's because we need to return total as a string. I bet you. So I'm using string interpolation here by using the backticks and then putting total, basically turning total into a string. Let's see if maybe that was it. Let's just say 12 divided by 7. Oh yeah, that's way better. Okay. Okay, so what are we, oh, we're missing decimals. Let's see, 12.3. Yeah, we need to add decimals. So for decimals, we really, it's kind of silly that I added the decimal function. It was kind of unnecessary. Where are you, decimal press? So maybe I don't need to have that. We can just run that code in the if check down here. And I'm gonna get rid of this console.log that we're not using anymore. So we should, instead of calling this decimal press function, I'm gonna do like we're doing for the clear button and just basically do the logic here. So the logic is, let's set current number plus equals, or like equal to, basically. current number plus a dot. So we're just adding a dot to the end of the string when we press that. We will call update display with current number. And that should be it. So let's try something like 12.5 plus 0.5 equals 13. Okay. Yeah, 12, let's divide by 0. Infinity, I like that. 12 divided by 0 is infinity. Okay, cool. So anything divided by 0 is infinity in this calculator world here. 12 times 3 plus 4. So 12 times 3 is 36 plus 4 is 40. So when I click equals, yes, okay. But I think towards the beginning, we found a bug that was like 12 times 3 plus 4 equals 40. But then now I want to click divide by 10, and it just doesn't work. And I think it must have something to do with the way I'm resetting. So let's think about that for a second. So let's say 12 times 3 equals, what is the state right now? Well, the state is that we've reset. We've reset, not resetted. We've reset these two right here, but current number is 36. And that's because in the reset function, in the case of equals here, at the end, when we call this function, we're calling reset with the current num, or like the returned value. So we're basically calling it like this, 36. Well, string value of that. So we're basically calling it with this. So we're resetting numbers and operations to the empty array, and then we're setting current number to 36, and then we're updating the display. And when I click divided by, the state is then, the numbers should be, oh, I bet you, let's do some logging and investigate. This shouldn't take more than like a minute or two, hopefully, and then I can end this stream. But I want to go inside of the number press, and I guess just at the end, we'll console.log numbers. And then at the end of operator press, we'll console.log operators for operations. Let's see, 12 times 3 equals, this is not the best place to log those. Instead, I should do it wherever we're calling the push, which is right here. So let's console.log inside of here the numbers and operations. That's better. So 12 times 3, 12 and multiply, equals. Okay, so as of right now, well, when I log this, it's 12, 3, multiply and equals, but then it goes through, does the math, and then calls reset. So actually, at the end, it's not that anymore. So I'm gonna log down here, and we can see that if I do 12 times 3 equals, it's actually 2 empty arrays now. And then if I click divided by 3 equals, it's basically staying that way. So what I need to do is let's say inside of reset, You know what? It's operation mode, isn't it? It's operation mode. So at the end of a calculation, I'm setting operation mode to false. We should only set that to false if it's not equal. So let's set it there, and then let's see if that fixes it. So let's say 12 times 3 equals, now let's say plus 4 equals, boom. All right, fixed the bug. All right. Glad that didn't take too long. So, fully working chat app. I said chat app because I was still in my head of the chat app tutorial series that I'm in the middle of releasing. But currently we have a bunch of people in the chat. Sorry that I missed everyone in the chat. I wanted to focus on the video in this one. Let me quickly run through this. Hey, good work, bro. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. You're welcome. Background size contain, you say. Ooh. All right, while we're here, let's fix that. So background size contain, they say. Boom. Okay, that didn't quite work. Is it because I'm zoomed in? No, that didn't do it. Sorry, that one didn't seem to work. But if I do cover, or closer, background size contained. Sorry, I did what you asked and that one didn't work for me. Although that did. Just commenting everything out apparently worked. No, but it doesn't work when I make it big. That's unfortunate. All right, let's see. How do we call WebKit? What do you mean? Line 29, Oscar, I must have missed that. Okay, how do you change only the corner buttons to have a rounded edge? I'm selecting each one individually. There's multiple ways I could have gone about it. Looks like you already realized that, but yeah. Will this vid be available after the live stream ends? Yes, it will. Hello from Brazil. Hello from America, Gabriel. Will the code be available on GitHub later? Yes, it will. And thank you from Bangladesh. All right, well, thank you from the United States. And thank you for watching, everyone. I will see you all in the next video.